So what I was telling you at the beginning is when you log into the portal, you see that screen. You have to sign up. Then you have to access the terms and conditions in order to proceed to get your own account. On this page, you actually will have the option to find more information material, some training videos, also having tutorials, particular learning a little bit more about the environment, and also you have the option to connect to that training site where you can get more, in particular, specialized presentations and webinars that have been recorded earlier. Then when you're logging into, you get your approval from the federation that you can access and that you have your own project, which is presented by the tenant ID. Then you can log in and see something like this screen. This tenant ID, as I said before, is in particular of high importance if you want to contact help desk, for instance. We need to know that in order to track down if you have any issues, so that we can have a chance to succeed in resolving the issue. Then you have also the option not only to log in as a user, but also to join some organization. This organization is something like a project where you work together with other participants. This is in particular of interest for the community users, less for the trial users, because you will not have access to such organizations and you will only have, as a trial user, a very limited resource pool from which you can install your virtual machines. These resources are in terms of CPU, RAM, and floating IPs. So if you're connecting now to the portal, your first view will be that on the instances you already have initialized. By the way, this is your tenant ID on the lower end of the screen. Next, if you have a list of images, these are the pool of prepared images where you can start a virtual machine from. Clicking on that image reveals then more information about the image in form of metadata to get the information what this machine is doing, how, for which purpose it's prepared, and so on. So you will find here a number of prepared images for the functionality from the FIWARE Lab, from the FIWARE, and the FIWARE Ops is actually the resource pool. And you will also find some generic images where you can instantiate, configure your own virtual machines. Instantiate them, log into, and then configure that as if you would work with a real single standalone machine. Okay. To select where you're working, if you are a trial user, you will only have one name, one tenant ID, so it's not that much an issue here. But if you're working together with other people or on several nodes under different names potentially, then you will first have to select under which tenant you will be doing your work. And then you have to select the region, under which region you are working. At the moment, we have approximately 19 to 20 regions, constantly growing. So you have, if you are not assigned to a particular region by the portal, then you can select the regions where you want to deploy your project. So this you are doing here in that selection list, where you can see that Berlin is only one of the regions. At this point in time, you will have prepared, we will need to prepare your tenant in order for being able to work with it. You have to connect virtual machines to a network, and what you are actually needing is, for your tenant, you need at least one private network in order to connect virtual machines to that. You will need a tenant router, which is actually connecting that virtual network to another network. Might be a public one or might be another tenant network if you want to simulate distributed systems. This external network is probably providing you access to a public network, the internet, and is also providing you a pool where you can obtain IP addresses to their public network. So the resources that you're actually working with are strictly limited. That means we only have a limited number of CPUs, a limited number of RAM size or disk space available. And one of the most restricted resources is the public IP address. So be careful in using them. You are taking them from others, from other users. So to create a network, you are actually doing that in that menu. The networks, you see here on that menu, there is a selection where you can create networks, and you can also create routers in that network, in that selection below. So you click on the left side, networks, then you click on create networks. And when you created the network, you have to create next a subnet. This subnet is actually giving you an IP address in your virtual network. This is required in order to start up a virtual machine. So this is the menu where you're creating your network. You provide a network name, you provide a name for the subnet, you provide a network address. We can do that probably by this example. In this case, I created an arbitrary network name and selected this private IP address range in order to provide dynamic host configuration and dynamic IP address to the virtual machine. There is important to note that there might be an overlap with existing networks. This must be unique, so if you get an error message, you may need to repeat that step with a different network address range, in particular if you have assigning large address ranges. So this is some freedom you have. In order to create such large network, you may be able to instantiate a number of virtual machines and simulate large systems. So we didn't restrict that in that way. It would be possible to avoid error messages here, but that would restrict that in your freedom to configure the virtual machine and the environment as you need it for your project. If you want to create a router, you're doing that the same way. You have the router button here in the lower end on the left-hand side. Then you create the router and click on router name in order to select interfaces for this router. And those interfaces are connecting, as is usual for a router, to two networks. One is your private network, your virtual network in your tenant, where you later on connect your virtual machine. And the other one is probably an external network, a public network, which is providing you a public IP address. In that configuration, this is the basic configuration. You can now consider how to start a virtual machine. Forgot, by the way, if you want to connect to a public network and want to have the virtual machine connected to a private network to get access to the network, you have to make it a gateway. You're doing that by clicking on the router, selecting the router, and then set gateway and set gateway and push the set gateway button in that menu on the top. Okay, that is, there have been observed some problems with the OpenStack in the past. So it is best practice first to set the gateway and then, as a second step, attach the tenant network. This is not a general recommendation. It may depend, but if you get an error message, you should try it simply the other way around. So the network naming is currently aligned between the nodes so that you may end up in a few days or in the course of the next 2 weeks, you will get a consistent naming over all the nodes. So you can derive from the name of the network its function. In that case, for the Berlin node, we provide currently two networks. One is the public network, XNet public, which is actually the internet. And we also provide for internal purposes the federation network. This is a private network going to a VPN. Usually you cannot access anything on that network. but we have a sufficiently large number of IP addresses for that network available. It is of interest probably for certain projects that want to have a virtual private network interconnection between different nodes. This has to be discussed with the nodes in order to install that, to make that available. But it is a service offered. So at this point in time, you have the private tenant network and you have a gateway. This gateway is a NAT gateway, which is routing you to a public network, for example. So if you want now to instantiate a virtual machine, you simply have that to connect to the private network, and then it gets a DHCP address from this network, and you can connect to the external network, probably to the internet. So the next step is how to reach that virtual machine. There are actually two ways. If you're just trying, if you are just experimenting, you can reach it via a virtual terminal. This does not need a public IP address. But if you want to provide services, if you want to provide this virtual machine as a service from your own installation, from your own domain, then you need a public IP for that. This is in the OpenStack naming. It is a floating IP. That means the public network that you attached your gateway to is providing a pool. This pool contains of several IP addresses, and you can associate as a trial user only one of those addresses to your tenant and can assign it to a virtual machine, and then you can reach the virtual machine through this public IP address. Before you can really start up a virtual machine, it is good to provide the completion of the environment. Since you are intending in that case that you access your virtual machine from the outside world, then you actually should also think a little bit about security, and that means that you could provide a public-private key pair, which you can upload on startup into your virtual machine, which allows then the login. Some of the prepared images do not allow password-based login. They require a key pair, so it's always good to have that available in advance. That may be needed in order to configure that in the next step. There are some virtual machines images that allow you to enter by password, but these are not the usual ones that we provide from the FIWARE Ops. Okay, it's always best practice to prepare security rules. The tenant that you are working with has a firewall, and this firewall requires that you set up some rules. This is usually done by selecting security, as you have done for creating the key pair. You are selecting security rules by specifying the security group. When you're starting with your tenant, there exists only one, the default group, and this default group is, to my knowledge, I'm not sure about that, actually providing only the option it's allowing ICMP. That means you can send a ping to your virtual machine and will probably get a reply from that. But if you want to log in, probably by SSH over the public IP address, you need to open up that virtual port 22. This is done in that menu. The ICMP rule is usually available for the default one, for the default security group, and you have to open up the TCP port 22 in order to allow that your virtual machine is accepting a secure shell login from the outside world. And this is the point where you actually should really use a key pair and not to expect that you can log in via password and username. Okay, and then it is best practice. We have experienced that earlier, that you tend always to make one security rule for all cases, but it's not a good idea. If you have several virtual machines for several purposes, it's always good to think about which security holds those machines actually require, and only to provide those in the security group. that makes your environment a little bit more safer. Okay, then now you have prepared everything that you need in order to be able to work with your tenant. So to work with your tenant, you first should select an image. Look at the images menu on the left-hand side. Those image offerings are particular for the node or the region that you are working in. They may differ because the nodes are not completely equal. They also provide particular infrastructure that are unique for a node. Something like a wireless access network or something like a sensor network that you can access from your virtual machine later on if you're doing experimental projects. These are probably proprietary to the node you're working with. And that means that you will find also images that probably provide the access to that. These are either special enablers or, in the terminology of FIWARE, generic enablers that are defined and available from the FIWARE catalog. In that image preparation, they provide all the interfaces being able to access the physical hardware and the outside world. So the list of images usually provided by a node is it's quite large at the moment. You should have, if when you're logging in, look on what is available. Most of the machines of the images, you can find more information in the FIWARE catalog, what they're actually doing. You will get, when you're clicking, as said in the beginning, on the name of the image, you will get more information what this machine is actually providing, and if it is configurable, can be used in the blueprint and so on. This information is then provided per image. Just click on the name, then you will get more information on this image. If you want to launch an image to instantiate a virtual machine on your tenant, just select the machine. And no, not select in that menu, you cannot select it, but just click on the corresponding launch button. Then you will get the menu which is required to configure your virtual machine before it is launched. This is actually done in this menu. So what you actually have to do is first to specify an instance name, then you define the flavor. The flavor is something which is shown on the right-hand side, the details. This is determining how many CPUs and how many RAM, how many disk space, and so on you want to have. There are a number of limits. One is in particular your quota. For trial users, we allow only 2 CPUs, I guess, and limited to I think a reasonable disk amount of 20 gigabytes or something like that, which is particular for the flavor. And you have a number of flavors where you can select from. You have to note that if you instantiate certain virtual machines, the flavor is important because some of the images, in particular those that you get from the internet, those prepared images of the Ubuntu and so on, they are probably not running safely in tiny models, too few RAM, for instance. If you experience an error that you cannot start the virtual machine, then you should probably first try if this is depending on the flavor. Just give it a little bit more disk, a little bit more RAM, and some more CPUs, and then try again if you can start it up. Okay. Then, in the next step, you have to specify the security and access rules. This is, as said before, you have to define a key pair, which is put into the virtual machine that allows you to log in later on. And you have also to set the firewall rules applying to that virtual machine. In that case, as I explained before, you have the default the default security group, which is allowing you here access via SSH and pinging that virtual machine. I think for the most of the experiments, that is sufficient for the first step. You have to notice that those security rules are allowed type rules, and they add, so you can also select multiple security groups. They are combined and joined, giving the overall security rules for the resulting virtual machine in the end. Next step is then you have to select from the available networks these are your tenant networks where you can connect the virtual machine. And if you have created a network, your network will be listed in this list. Just move it by clicking on moving it to the selected networks. Then it will be connected to a virtual network interface in the virtual machine. It's automatically done. And you should probably at this point in time only select networks you know. You cannot connect directly, although those are here in that slide listed. This is just a case because for capturing that slide, I have used the tenant which is owning those networks. You usually only see the networks here in this place that you own, usually those that you have created or that have been made, shared, and public by somebody else who created that. So that means usually you're connecting only a private tenant network to your virtual machine. So on this slide, without going into detail, you will get more information about what can happen. You should consider something. One thing is no virtual machine will start if you don't have assigned a network to it. It requires a network to start up because it needs to have a dynamic IP address, which is getting from the subnet that you have been creating before, a DHCP configuration. If you don't have that, the network adapter in the virtual machine fails to start up, and your network and your virtual machine fails to start because it does not have a network adapter. This is the consequence out of it. If you want to associate a floating IP to that virtual machine to access it from the outside world, you should also use that you are using the correct network. You have to know for the network that you are choosing to which external network that network is connected via the default router instantiated before. You can access a public network, let's say the internet, only if you have a default gateway to that network you are now attaching to. So then you should also probably do some sanity checks. This is only needed if you probably fail in starting up the machine. In particular, when connecting a virtual machine to a network, you can make a lot of mistakes here. So have a look on this slide. You have it available in training. It gives you some hints what you should check in case you experience a startup failure of your virtual machine. If nothing of that really helps, you need to contact the help desk, I guess. So in the final menu, you get a summary of your settings. And when then going next, you will actually start up the virtual machine. For experienced users, you also have the opportunity to provide a customization script. This customization script can be used to start up your guest operating system in the virtual machine if you want to do some particular test with that instance. Okay, then you get finally that screen where it summarized what you're actually doing, what you have been set before, which network and which key pair. And then you can launch the instance. So you should have a look on the menu after you are entering that this portal web page upon startup of your virtual machine, launching your virtual machine. And then you will get some more information, for instance, in which state it is. This build state, for instance, is the first state after starting up a virtual machine. Has not yet a running state or something like that, or an error state. It's just starting up. And you have to wait until those state information actually is changing in order to be safe that your machine has been started. You have probably, you get an error message. And then you have to look in which state your machine is stuck in order to get an information what mistake you made on starting up. It may fail for several reasons, as for the network configuration case that I gave before. So here on this slide, you will find some hints what you can have, what may have happened, and what you should check. In the end, if you cannot get any resolution by following these guidelines, these hints, then you may need to contact the help desk in order to evaluate what happened to your experiment. And in that case, it's important that you really provide all the information that you have about your experiment. Your tenant ID, the virtual machine ID, probably what you did. But this is not necessary to provide, for instance, screenshots. Convenient, but probably not necessary. It is important to get also the time at which point in time you actually experienced an issue. Then we can have a look in the log files and we will find what has blocked your virtual machine on startup. Okay, just one hint regarding best practice. If you have successfully launched a virtual machine and you plan to utilize it more often, you should consider to make a snapshot from a virtual machine in case you experience any problems later on, misconfigurations or whatever else can happen. There can happen a lot of things. Then it's always good to have a snapshot available in order to restart that. In particular, if you're configuring a lot of things in your newly started, newly created virtual machine. Okay. So next step is, if you want to access your virtual machine from the outside world, you have to assign a floating IP to that virtual machine. You are doing that also in the security tab. On the left-hand side, you see security. In that menu already have assigned security groups and key pairs. The first tab is assigning floating IPs. And under this list, this will be empty in your first case. You will have first to allocate an IP. If you are clicking on that button, allocate IP to the project, you're actually asking the floating IP pool to provide one IP address for your tenant, not yet associated with any virtual machine at this point in time, but you have reserved that for your project. In that case, you can, this happens quite often, you can get a failure, an error, which is saying that no more floating IPs are available. Unfortunately, this is a constant problem at the moment, and we are doing our best to free up floating IP addresses, but we cannot guarantee at the moment, as best effort, that a floating IP is available. It's always good to try several times because we are constantly freeing up floating IPs that you will probably acquire in your next request. You will then get probably a new IP. Okay, as said before, the floating IP pools have been selected and all public networks are providing a floating IP pool. In the future, we will have a number of floating IP pools available for several purposes. I mentioned for the case of the Berlin node earlier that we have the internet floating IP pool and we have also an internal VPN, which is probably can be used, but can only be used if you are in contact with the node operator. It will lead you to nowhere at the moment if you are just assigning it. Okay. Those networks are shared, they are provided to you. You do not need to instantiate them. If you say allocate floating IP in the menu, then you can select from the pool, and those pools that are available to you are then presented in the selection list. And you should then, or as a trial user, you can probably allocate one floating IP at this point in time. As a community user, there will be different quotas that we are managing at the nodes. Okay, floating IPs that are actually associated with your tenant are then listed. The list is probably growing depending on your role. If you are really a use case project or something like that, you will probably have a number of floating IPs. As a trial user, you will only see one floating IP here. If you now want to use that, you need to have a running virtual machine, which is active and can receive an IP address. Then you're just doing that by selecting the floating IP that you want to allocate, and then say associate IP. Here in this allocate IP project, in the menu, there's also a selection of, in the action list here, there's also a menu allocate IP, where you will end up in that menu, and then you can see which IP you selected, and then you have to select the instance. In that list, you will see all the virtual machines that you have already started in your tenant. So, when you want to connect to the virtual machine, you have actually, as said before, two options. One option is to access that through a virtual terminal. The other one is to access it through secure shell access. For the VNC, you do not need to prepare anything. Just look on the instances menu and then use the connection tab, and then view display will connect you to a virtual machine, into a virtual display connected to your virtual machine. If you want to connect to your virtual machine to a public IP address, you have before that to instantiate, to associate a public IP to that virtual machine. Yes, and after successfully opening a virtual machine display, it should look like that or very similar to that. Then you get the login prompt of your virtual machine. Okay, on the screen, on the slide, they're also given some hints what probably may block you to see that screen. You should also consider that your virtual machine probably takes some time to start up, operating system and the guest operating system in your virtual machine. So give it some time to react. It might not have been completely booted up. So you will probably need to wait for a few minutes in order to get the login screen. Depends on the image that you have been starting. So if you want to connect via SSH, it's just making up a terminal window on your working workstation and then connect by SSH. At the moment, you need to have the floating IP that you have assigned to your virtual machine in order to do that, and probably also your key that you are actually using in order to access that virtual machine. You have been, upon startup, assigned a key to that machine. Okay. So we'll make that a little bit shorter. We are running out of time due to that unfortunate mistake in the beginning. What the next set of slides are presenting is how to use a volume. In case you need to separate the virtual machine and its disk space, you have the option to create virtual disks and to associate those virtual disks with a certain device in your guest operating system. This is shown on the next slides. Create the volume and then associate that with the virtual machine. This is actually the list of attachments. You attach the instance, or you select the instance where the virtual disk should be connected to, and the device name to which it should be connected in the guest operating system of your virtual machine. Okay. At this point in time, you have done a lot of things. You have been instantiated virtual machine, have accessed that virtual machine, have probably equipped it with a virtual disk. And from this point in time, actually, it starts that you can work with your environment. So what is next? Next thing is explore a little bit what the FIWARE portal, the FIWARE Lab portal is offering to you. You will see, as said before, a number of already running machines that are shared. You will see a lot of images. You can also have a look at the instances. You will get, for those machines that are supporting it, also some monitoring information, real-time displays, and in the future also historic information about the utilization of your virtual machines. Then you can learn more about the virtual machines by clicking on the names. As said before, you can, for instance, see if you have a virtual machine image available which can be configured from the outside world. That means via the option to create blueprints and to configure blueprints, you see what virtual default IP addresses the machine has and what it is running upon, number of virtual machines and so on. The blueprint feature is not fully functional at the moment at the node, but it will be in a few weeks, so that you can configure from a basic image, you can customize your machines, which is in particular important if you are working on several nodes and want to create configuration which is interconnecting those nodes and virtual machines on the various nodes. Then you can use the blueprint characteristic in order to configure those machines and to deploy them in parallel. This is something that it's very useful if you have larger installations with several services distributed over all or several regions in the federation. Yes, always look if something that you need is already available. So I would recommend to look at store if you probably find something which is a preview or a functionality which is provided by another user. You will find a lot of pre-configured services and virtual machines in the store, and also can use for creating manually your virtual machine and services inside this machine in the Mesher portal, where you get a workspace and then can click together via cloud also the customized virtual machine that you want to deploy in your application. One last remark regarding the organization itself. If you want to know what is actually available in the federation, on which regions you can probably operate, where those regions are located, and so on, you will get in the infographics URL and the infographics, you can get more information about the current configuration. This is an information which is constantly changing with every new upcoming node. It's something like a real-time display what is currently available in form of resources in the whole federation. Here you can get also information about the status. You have to consider that there are a lot of instances, a lot of virtual machines, a lot of regions actively participating in the federation. So it could be that what you actually want to do is not possible because just the node that you are associated with is currently in maintenance mode. That means have a look on this menu, and then you will see in which status the various machines in various regions are. This is also real-time display, so this might vary continuously. Okay, so this was a very short, very brief overview. The portal is one nice thing, but if you want to go next, you will probably need to use the command line tools. Just give it another 5 minutes. What you're actually doing, you have to install the OpenStack client tools for the command line at your workstation. They are available, they are written in Python, and they are available for a lot of infrastructures, for a lot of workstation types, PCs, Macs, Linux, and so on. And what you actually get from installing that, these are several tools. This is the Cinder, for instance, for managing volumes. This is Glance for the images. You can get images, manipulate, get more information about images than you can get on Portal. The identity service, the keystone, required by everything else, but is usually not required for a user. Then Quantum Neutron, the networking API, which allows you to learn a little bit more about the networks you're operating with, the public networks as well as the tenant networks. Then the very large Nova, which is actually managing your virtual machine instances, gets you more information and more configuration capabilities than the portal is doing. And Swift, which is particular object storage API, which we did not cover so far. For time reasons, I would not go into detail here, but you can do it that way. So I have collected a little bit of information regarding the environment, how you set up and try to give some hints. So if you experience anything, any requirements that you cannot satisfy with the portal, or if you just want to be sure that the portal did the right thing, you cannot do everything via the portal, so you have to verify sometimes. Then you should have a look on those command line clients, and they can get more information about your working environment. It's also best practice to set up your environment so that you do not need to configure them in every call of the command line tool. One thing that you might not, if you are experienced with OpenStack, might not have experienced before is that in that case you really have to define the region name of this you want to access. You can also do that in a command line if you're working with in parallel with several regions, then you're probably giving that in a command line parameter. But if you're just a trial user, you can also do that by setting up your shell script and setting up that environment variable, which is setting the region name that you are preferably working with. Okay. So what you can actually get is a lot of more information about the virtual machines, for instance, also including snapshots. You can do that via the glance. You can also, this is something you cannot do at the portal, also upload your own images to your tenant. They are local to your tenant after loading that. And then you can create your own virtual machine with your own image. Probably not interesting that much for a trial user, but I think it's a very commonly requirement for a larger project that they have prepared images that they want to distribute to several regions. You can also explore a little bit more about the details than you can get in the portal by just asking information about the image. You can, for addressing an image, you can use the image name, or you can also use that unique identifier. This one is required since the naming it allows duplicated names. So you should always prefer the UUID in order to identify an image. So for those things, deleting virtual image or updating image metadata or exporting image for download, this is the way you are using the glance on the command line. Very similar functionality is with running instances. You're just using the Nova in order to get more information. This is in particular of interest if you have errors. You can use the listing of the property of an instance in order to detect if there is some error message that you did not see on the screen. And this is an example for this case. Here you can clearly see what actually happened with the instantiation of the virtual machine. This is actually also what we are doing as the maintainers. Then when we get some information from a user that he has a problem with starting up a virtual machine, we are doing exactly that. We are looking into the characteristics of the metadata of the virtual machines, and then we get probably the information about what happens. And in this case, we had a problem of instantiating a virtual machine. HTTP 500 is the only message that you get, and client exception is telling you that the problem is something like that the Nova has generated when instantiating the machine an internal exception, which is probably due to a temporary outage of resources, something like floating IPs, RAM, or CPUs. Then we can give more information. This is also something that you can do as a user and cannot get through the portal. Okay. So we are already 15 minutes over time. I again apologize for the problems in the beginning of the presentation, and we will probably have some time, some minutes, if you have some questions. So that is probably also interesting for you. So hands raised. Mhm. Let's see. Unmute. So what I'm trying now is to unmute all the persons that have raised their hands. So please start to talk if you have any question.
Good evening.
Hello.
One question about IPv6.
Yes.
Are
Big
they
issue for
available
us.
or?
Yes. We are currently migrating all the nodes to the OpenStack Icehouse release. This allows you, and it's also possible at the moment for most instances, you need the command line tools for doing that, to create local networks that are IPv6. That might work, but Icehouse does not allow quantum networks with IPv6. This is first, to my knowledge, first done in Juno, and that will be clear in approximately 2 months from now, if we can also provide external networks with IPv6. Internal is possible at the moment. The tenant network can be IPv6, but it cannot get a public IP, which is IPv6.
Got it. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, but very distorted.
Oh, I'm sorry. Maybe I just try. My question is, are there any workflows or tutorials, maybe videos for setting up those virtual machines, for example, anything more tangible to work with or to orientate?
There are two ways to do that. One is the basics you can learn from the OpenStack guides. They have a number of guides, best practice guides, how to do that. The portal is slightly different from the OpenStack Horizon, but it's close enough to use them. Then you have the slides that we are providing in those webinars. That would be also a way to start. And after that, best practice. We try at the moment to make your life a little bit more convenient. We can do that with pre-allocating and pre-configuring your tenants with networks and with routers, but we cannot do that with virtual machines. So actually, you are depending on future webinars that we will have in the project. If it is not sufficient that you get it from OpenStack, then you will have to use the webinars that we are providing.
Okay. Second question, you mentioned that it's possible to upload my own images. Is it meant that anybody else can use this image for own purpose?
And no, it is if you upload an image or if you are creating an image through a snapshot from your running machine, that's the same case, then it is private to your tenant. I know that the OpenStack people are currently implementing features to share images, but this is managed in a way that you say that this image has a certain list of members. That means you have to name to the image as a metadata to which tenant it should be visible explicitly. If you do not use it, you have only two options. You can make it share. If you are the owner of an image, you can make it shared. Then it is visible to everybody, probably not the recommended way. Or you can make it private. Then it is seen by nobody else than you.
Okay, when this feature maybe will be fulfilled?
I think it is coming up with Juno, so we will not have that available within the next 2 or 3 weeks. But it is good, probably the Federation is working on, and it is constantly extended regarding those facilities. So have an eye when it's showing up. I'm pretty sure that those features will be announced in the next releases. If we actually provide that, it will be announced in the portals.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. Okay. Then, are there any further questions? Any further raised hands? So actually not. So then, yeah, I have. Sorry. So I make Mika. I make
Hello?
you. Yes. Hello.
Yes, I'm a bit new to this FIWARE Lab, but how about the commercial use or the
Yes, that is actually a big issue. The point is that at this point in time, a number of non-profit organizations have been providing the platform. Among them, we are, as a non-profit research organization, also one of these. We will not be allowed to make real business out of it. This is the point that in the future there will be some restructuring regarding the consist of the whole federation. I would suggest to observe what is going on until September and then what's going on further in the FI core project. There will be announcements, I think. The clear intention is to make it available for business operations, or at least to be assistant in doing that. But I'm not sure when this will really be in place. So please have an eye on the announcement that you get via the portal. It will be, I guess it will be done in the next month, latest September.
okay, but so you can use it for testing, but can you download an image and then take it to some
Yeah, that is.
make your own?
I'm pretty sure that you can download an image and can put it to another platform. The OpenStack is basically compliant to EC2, I think. So Amazon should work, but I'm not sure about that. Never tried that. But it is a standard feature. I assume that it's possible. The formats of the virtual image of the images are actually also, it's given in the description of the image which format it is, and then you have to look if this is compliant to any other platform. I'm not talking about any license issues regarding that. This is a different things. If you should really download something, I'm pretty sure that the FIWARE, all the images that are offered by the platforms are actually also available through the FIWARE catalog. So I'm not sure actually if you will really violate any license restrictions or something like that by downloading. Please have a look at the FIWARE catalog. There will be more information on the particular images.
Yeah, it's depending on the specific or generic enablers you're using.
Exactly.
I suspect.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Not
all of them are open source. This is what I know actually.
No, they aren't.
Okay, thanks. Okay, then I'm very glad about your patience and apologies again for the problem in the beginning. I didn't get the feedback, so I didn't notice it. I hope that you have this webinar was satisfactory for you, despite the fact. And please have a look at the slides. I was not able to present everything, to talk about everything. But I think they can be used also outside of a webinar, and I hope that they are helping you in doing the first steps in the federation. And as a help desk maintainer, I would wish it to myself too. Many thanks. Then I would like to close. Yes? Another question?
No, thanks.
Okay, then,
I'm just saying thank you.
Then many thanks. Many thanks for your patience and many thanks for attending that webinar.